4 satellites, 4 different operators, 4 independent data systems. All of them returned the exact same image, and what they found changes everything we thought we knew about the pyramids. Beneath the Giza plateau, more than half a mile straight down, 8 spiral shafts descend into the earth. Perfect helical coils wrapped around central columns, geometry that cannot exist in nature. And at the bottom, 2 chambers larger than most sports arenas, sealed in darkness for longer than recorded history. The pyramids are not monuments, they are capstones, the tip of something so vast that the structures we have marvelled at for centuries are merely the roof. In the next 2 hours, you will see the satellite data. You will understand the technology that made this discovery possible. You will learn why the scientific establishment is fighting to suppress these findings, and you will discover how ancient myths about hidden halls beneath Egypt match what modern instruments have just revealed. The descent into the greatest archaeological mystery of our time begins now. The signal that changed everything. Before we begin, like and subscribe if this calm, science-driven format resonates with you. Use the hype button if it is available. In the comments, note your location, your current time, and the key question this topic triggers for you. I will address the strongest questions in comments or in a later video. There is a moment in every great discovery when the world splits in 2. There is the world before the data arrived, and the world after. We do not always recognize these moments when they happen. They slip past us disguised as ordinary days, ordinary conversations, ordinary interviews on ordinary podcasts. And then weeks or months or years later, we look back and realize that everything changed in that single hour. That single sentence, that single image, rendered from numbers we did not yet know how to interpret. December the 7th, 2025, may prove to be one of those moments. On that day, an Italian radar engineer named Filippo Biondi sat down for a nearly 2-hour conversation with Jesse Michaels on the American Alchemy podcast. The topic was the Giza Plateau, the pyramids, the Sphinx, structures that humanity has gazed upon for millennia, structures we believed we understood, at least in their broad outlines. Tombs for pharaohs, monuments to ego and eternity, stone piled upon stone by tens of thousands of workers under the brutal Egyptian sun. But Biondi did not come to talk about what sits above the sand. He came to talk about what lies beneath it, and what he revealed, calmly, methodically, with the precision of a scientist who knows his data is about to change everything, was this. The pyramids of Giza are not what we think they are. They are not the main structure. They are not even close to the main structure. The pyramids, those iconic monuments that have defined our understanding of ancient Egypt for centuries, may be nothing more than capstones, markers, the visible tip of something so vast, so deep, so geometrically impossible that our current models of ancient civilization cannot account for it. Beneath the Khafra Pyramid, the second largest of the 3 Great Pyramids, Biondi and his team detected 8 massive hollow cylinders plunging straight down into the earth. Each cylinder contains a central column wrapped in perfect helical coils, spiraling downward like the threads of a screw or the grooves of a drill bit frozen in stone. These shafts do not stop at 10 meters. They do not stop at 50 meters. They do not stop at 100 meters. They descend more than 1 kilometer into the bedrock, 3,500 feet, more than half a mile straight down. And at the bottom, where these 8 spiraling shafts converge, sit 2 enormous cubic chambers. Each one measures approximately 260 feet on every side. That is larger than most sports arenas. That is larger than many city blocks. That is a volume of enclosed space that dwarfs anything we have ever associated with ancient Egyptian construction. Think about that for a moment. We have spent centuries marvelling at the Great Pyramid, at its 2.3 million stone blocks, at its nearly 500-foot height, at the precision of its angles, and the mystery of its internal chambers. And now we're being told that directly beneath these monuments, invisible to every tourist, every archaeologist, every satellite photograph, there exists a structure that makes the visible pyramids look like decorative flourishes on the roof of a cathedral we never knew existed. The pyramids are just the tip of the iceberg, Biondi said during the interview. They are merely a capstone to something much larger beneath the surface. The real structure is below. Now, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This is the foundation of scientific skepticism, and it is a principle that has protected us from countless frauds and fantasies over the centuries. Anyone can claim to have found something remarkable beneath the sands of Egypt. The history of Egyptology is littered with sensational announcements that evaporated under scrutiny. But Biondi brought something to this conversation that most claimants do not bring. He brought redundancy. 4 separate satellite systems, operated by 4 different companies, using 4 independent data collection methods, all returned the same results. Umbra, Capella Space, ICI, and Italy's Cosmo SkyMed constellation. These are not fringe operations. These are not amateur enthusiasts with homemade equipment. These are commercial and governmental satellite operators whose technology is used for everything from agricultural monitoring to military reconnaissance to infrastructure assessment. All 4 satellites gave exactly the same results, Biondi told Michaels. That is really amazing. We cannot announce anything without these basic scientific methods. This is crucial. In science, replication is everything. A single observation, no matter how striking, can be an error, an artifact of the equipment, a misinterpretation of the data, a fluke of atmospheric conditions or processing algorithms. But when 4 independent systems designed by different engineers, launched by different organizations, analyzing data collected on different days, all converge on the same conclusion, the probability of error drops dramatically. The structures beneath Giza are not a ghost in the machine. They appear on every scan. But how is this possible? How can satellites orbiting hundreds of miles above the Earth detect structures buried more than half a mile beneath it? This is where Biondi's work becomes genuinely revolutionary, and where we must pause to understand the technology that made this discovery possible. Traditional radar, the kind used in weather stations and air traffic control, sends out pulses of electromagnetic energy and measures what bounces back. This works beautifully for detecting aircraft or storm systems, but it fails completely when you try to look underground. Soil absorbs radar, rock absorbs radar. The electromagnetic waves simply cannot penetrate more than a few meters into solid material before they dissipate entirely. This is why Zahi Hawass, the former Egyptian Minister of Antiquities, immediately dismissed Biondi's claims as fake news. Radar cannot penetrate to such depths, Hawass argued. The techniques employed are neither scientifically approved nor validated. And if Biondi were using traditional radar, Hawass would be absolutely correct. But Biondi is not using traditional radar. He developed something called synthetic aperture radar Doppler tomography, and it operates on an entirely different principle. Instead of trying to push electromagnetic waves through solid rock, this technique listens to the rock itself. It detects microscopic vibrations on the surface, tiny movements caused by background seismic activity, by the constant low-frequency hum of the planet, by the acoustic energy that propagates through stone the way sound propagates through air. Everything vibrates. The ground beneath your feet is vibrating right now, at frequencies too low and amplitudes too small for your senses to detect, but vibrating nonetheless. These vibrations are influenced by what lies beneath them. A solid, homogeneous mass of rock vibrates differently than a hollow chamber. A vertical shaft filled with air vibrates differently than the surrounding limestone. The geometry of underground structures leaves an acoustic fingerprint on the surface movements above them. Biondi's genius was recognizing that satellite radar, though it cannot penetrate the ground, can detect these surface vibrations with extraordinary precision. The Doppler effect, the same phenomenon that makes an ambulance siren change pitch as it passes you, allows radar systems to measure velocity. And if you can measure the velocity of microscopic surface movements over time, you can begin to reconstruct what underground structures are causing those movements. The Earth itself becomes the sensor. This is not speculative physics. This is not theoretical hand-waving. Biondi has published peer-reviewed research on this methodology, dating back to 2022. His work appeared on our archive, the preprint server where physicists and engineers share their findings before formal journal publication. The mathematics are public. The algorithms are documented. The technique has been validated in controlled settings, which brings us to the proof that may ultimately silence the skeptics. Before turning his technology on the pyramids, Biondi conducted what scientists call a blind test. He aimed his satellite analysis at a location where the underground structures were already known with absolute certainty, a place where humans had built something deep beneath the surface, measured it precisely, and documented every dimension. He chose the Gran Sasso National Laboratory in Italy. This is the largest underground physics laboratory in the world, a facility carved into the heart of a mountain in the Apennines, 125 miles from where Biondi processed his satellite data. The laboratory sits beneath more than a kilometre of solid rock, which shields its sensitive experiments from cosmic radiation. Its dimensions are precisely known. Its location is precisely mapped. If Biondi's technique was real, it would find the laboratory exactly where it should be. If the technique was flawed, the data would show nothing, or worse, show structures that did not exist. The measurements matched reality with 100% precision. We did measurements of the Gran Sasso d'Italia Physics Laboratory, Biondi explained. Our measurements and the reality match 100%. This is the moment when skepticism must evolve into something else. Not blind acceptance, but genuine scientific curiosity. A technology that can accurately map a known underground facility through a kilometre of mountain rock deserves serious consideration when it reports unknown structures beneath the sands of Giza. The burden of proof has shifted. It is no longer enough to simply dismiss the findings because they conflict with established narratives. And yet the findings do conflict with established narratives. Dramatically. Almost incomprehensibly. The structures Biondi detected are not small anomalies, not hidden chambers of the sort that Mune tomography found inside the Great Pyramid a few years ago. Those discoveries, while exciting, fit within our existing framework. A void here, an unexplored passage there. Secrets, yes, but secrets that the pyramid could plausibly contain. What Biondi is describing does not fit any existing framework. 8 spiralling shafts descending more than 3,000 feet. Perfect helical geometry that cannot occur naturally. Cubic chambers larger than aircraft hangars at depths that would have been utterly impossible for ancient engineers using any technology we currently attribute to them. 100% man-made, Biondi stated when asked if these could be natural geological formations. You do not find perfect coils like this in geology. And here is where the mystery deepens beyond the merely archaeological. Because the spiral signature that appears beneath the Khafra pyramid does not appear only there. The same geometric pattern, the same helical structures, the same apparent engineering shows up in the scans of other locations across the Giza Plateau and beyond. Beneath the Menkaure Pyramid, the smallest of the 3 Great Pyramids, similar structures appear at a smaller scale. Beneath the Great Sphinx, that enigmatic lion-bodied guardian that has watched over the plateau for millennia, the scans reveal what appears to be a single massive shaft plunging into the earth. And 30 miles away, at a site called Hawara, where ancient historians once described a labyrinth that surpassed even the pyramids, in grandeur the same signatures emerge from the data. Whatever was built beneath Giza was not built in isolation. It was part of a network, a system, a design whose full extent we are only beginning to glimpse through instruments that see what human eyes never could. The old debris-filled shafts between the Sphinx and Khafra show up in the scans as direct access routes into the deeper complex. These are not theoretical entry points. These are physical passages, currently blocked by centuries of accumulated rubble, that appear to connect the surface monuments to whatever vast machinery or architecture waits below. Biondi's team has already submitted a formal proposal to Egyptian authorities. If approved, physical exploration could begin in 2026. for the first time in modern history, we may be able to descend into structures that have remained sealed since before recorded memory began. But approval is far from guaranteed. The Egyptian Antiquities Establishment has spent decades defending a particular narrative about the pyramids, a narrative that these findings threaten to demolish entirely. Careers have been built on that narrative. Reputations rest upon it. And the man who has defended it most fiercely, Zahi Hawass, has already declared war on these claims before any excavation can test them. The battle lines are drawn. On one side, data from 4 satellites and a technology validated against known underground structures. On the other, an academic establishment that insists such findings are impossible. And somewhere beneath the sands of Giza, in darkness that has not seen light for thousands of years or perhaps far longer, the truth waits, listening to the Earth's heartbeat. To understand what Filippo Biondi discovered beneath the Giza plateau, we must first understand the technology that made such a discovery possible. And to understand that technology, we must abandon some of our intuitions about how we perceive the world beneath our feet. When most people think of radar, they imagine beams of energy shooting through the air, bouncing off distant objects, and returning with information about what lies ahead. This is essentially correct. Radar, which stands for radio detection and ranging, works by emitting pulses of electromagnetic radiation and measuring what reflects back. The time delay tells us distance. The Doppler shift tells us velocity. The strength of the return tells us something about the size and composition of the target. This principle revolutionized warfare in the 20th century. It gave us the ability to detect incoming aircraft from hundreds of miles away. It allowed ships to navigate through fog and darkness. It enabled weather forecasters to track storms with precision that would have seemed magical to earlier generations. Radar sees what eyes cannot. But radar has a fundamental limitation. It cannot see through solid material. The electromagnetic waves that radar systems emit penetrate the air, with ease because air is largely empty space at the molecular level. But when those waves encounter dense matter, soil, rock, concrete, metal, they are absorbed or reflected almost immediately. Ground-penetrating radar, a specialized variant designed for archaeological and geological work, can sometimes image structures a few meters below the surface, but only under ideal conditions. Dry sand is relatively transparent. Wet clay is nearly opaque. Solid limestone, the kind that forms the bedrock of the Giza plateau, stops radar cold within the first meter or two. This is why Zahi Hawass dismissed Biondi's claims with such confidence. If you understand conventional radar physics, the idea of imaging structures more than a kilometer underground seems not just unlikely, but physically impossible. The electromagnetic waves simply cannot travel that far through rock. The energy dissipates. The signal dies. By the time you reach depths of 50 meters, let alone 500 or 1,000, there is nothing left to measure. And yet Biondi's technique works. The key insight is that Biondi is not trying to send radar waves through the rock. He is not trying to make limestone transparent. He is doing something far more subtle and far more ingenious. He is using radar to listen to the rock itself. Consider for a moment what the Earth actually is beneath your feet. We tend to think of the ground as static, as motionless, as the very definition of stability. Solid as a rock, we say. Firm ground. Terra firma. But this perception is an illusion created by the limitations of human senses. In reality, the ground is constantly moving. Seismic activity ripples through the planet every second of every day. Earthquakes in Chile send waves through the Earth's interior that can be detected in Norway. Ocean waves crashing against distant coastlines generate microseismic noise that propagates through continental crust. Human activity, traffic, construction, industrial machinery creates vibrations that travel for miles through stone. Even the moon's gravitational pull flexes the solid Earth by centimeters, creating tidal movements in rock that we cannot feel but instruments can measure. The Earth hums, it vibrates, it oscillates at frequencies ranging from the very low, cycles lasting minutes or hours, to the relatively high, dozens of cycles per second. This constant movement is usually ignored because it is so small. measured in micrometers or less, and because it seems like meaningless noise rather than useful signal. Biondi realized that this noise is not meaningless at all. It is information. When seismic energy propagates through the ground, it does not travel uniformly. It interacts with whatever structures lie in its path. A homogeneous mass of solid rock transmits vibrations differently than rock containing voids. A vertical shaft filled with air responds to acoustic energy differently than the surrounding limestone. The geometry of underground chambers creates patterns of resonance and interference that affect how the surface above them moves. Imagine dropping a pebble into a pond. The ripples spread outward in concentric circles, uniform and predictable in still water. But now imagine that beneath the surface of that pond, invisible to your eye, there is a complex arrangement of objects. Submerged rocks, hollow tubes, curved surfaces. Each of these objects would interact with the passing ripples, reflecting some energy, refracting some energy, creating interference patterns that distort the neat concentric circles into something more complex. If you could measure those surface ripples with enough precision, if you could map exactly how they deviated from the simple pattern you would expect in an empty pond, you could begin to reconstruct what objects must be causing those deviations. You would not need to see through the water. You would not need to send any energy downward at all. You would only need to observe the surface with sufficient accuracy and work backward from the effects to the causes. This is precisely what synthetic aperture radar Doppler tomography does with the Earth. Satellites orbiting several hundred kilometers above the planet emit radar pulses toward the ground. These pulses reflect off the surface, and by measuring the precise timing and frequency shift of the returns, the satellite can detect surface movements with astounding precision. Modern SAR systems can measure displacements of millimeters or less. They can track how a building settles over months. They can detect the subtle inflation of a volcano before eruption. They can monitor the stability of bridges and dams from space. Biondi's innovation was applying the sensitivity to the problem of subsurface imaging. By collecting SAR data over the same location repeatedly, over days and weeks and months, his algorithms can identify patterns in the surface micromovements. These patterns are not random. They are shaped by whatever structures exist beneath the surface. The mathematics of inverting this relationship, of working backward from observed surface movement to implied underground geometry, is complex, but it is not magic. It is physics, applied with extraordinary care and computational power. The Earth itself becomes the sensor, Biondi explained. We are not penetrating the ground with our radar. We are listening to what the ground tells us about itself. This concept has profound implications. Traditional archaeology requires excavation. You must dig to discover. You must move tons of soil and stone to reveal what lies beneath. This is slow, expensive, and destructive. Once you excavate a site, you cannot unexcavate it. The context is lost forever. And in politically sensitive locations like the Giza Plateau, permission to dig is nearly impossible to obtain. But Biondi's technique requires no excavation at all. The satellites pass overhead. The data streams down, the algorithms process, and images of underground structures emerge without disturbing a single grain of sand. This is archaeology from orbit. This is seeing the invisible without touching it. Of course, seeing is not the same as understanding. When the first images of the structures beneath Kafra's pyramid emerged from Biondi's computers, they did not come with labels and explanations. They showed geometry. They showed density variations. They showed the unmistakable signatures of void spaces and solid material arranged in patterns that demanded interpretation. And those patterns were strange. 8 cylindrical shafts descending vertically from the base of the pyramid. This alone would be remarkable, would suggest engineering on a scale we have never attributed to ancient Egypt. But the shafts were not simple cylinders. Each one contained internal structure, a central column running down the axis, and wrapped around that column, in perfect helical geometry, coiled elements that spiraled downward like the threads of a screw. Think about what a helix is. It is one of the most fundamental shapes in nature and in engineering. DNA coils in a double helix. Proteins fold into helical structures. Screws and bolts use helical threads to convert rotational motion into linear force. Spiral staircases allow efficient vertical movement in a compact footprint. Electrical inductors wrap wire in helical coils to create magnetic fields. The helix appears everywhere that nature or technology requires the elegant combination of circular and linear motion. But helices do not appear by accident in geology. Limestone does not naturally form into perfect coiled structures. Erosion does not carve spiraling shafts into bedrock. No known geological process produces the geometry that Biondi's scans revealed beneath Giza. This is why he stated with such certainty that the structures are 100% man-made. You do not find perfect coils like this in geology. The question then becomes not whether these structures are artificial, but who made them and for what purpose. Traditional Egyptology offers no answers here. The ancient Egyptians, as we understand them, were sophisticated builders capable of remarkable achievements, but their engineering was fundamentally based on mass. They moved stone, they stacked stone, they carved stone. They did not, according to any evidence we possess, bore kilometre-deep shafts with helical internal geometry. They did not construct cubic chambers the size of aircraft hangars, hundreds of metres underground. They did not create structures that would challenge modern tunnelling technology, and yet the structures exist. 4 satellites confirm they exist. The same mathematical signatures appear in every data set. Whatever paradigm we use to interpret ancient Egypt must now account for these findings, or it must explain why 4 independent satellite systems all produce the same false positive, a coincidence so unlikely as to border on the miraculous. The resonance. Implications add another layer of mystery. Biondi has speculated cautiously about what function these helical structures might serve. In modern engineering, coiled geometries are often associated with energy storage and transfer. Springs store mechanical energy. Inductors store magnetic energy. Resonant coils amplify specific frequencies while dampening others. If the underground structures at Giza were designed to interact with vibrations, with the constant seismic energy flowing through the earth, then the helical geometry makes a kind of functional sense. Coils wrapped around central columns, descending for hundreds of meters through solid rock, would create a vast acoustic instrument. The pyramids above, with their precise geometry and massive stone construction, might serve as the visible portion of this instrument, tuned resonators sitting atop a machine that extends far deeper than anyone imagined. This interpretation verges into territory that mainstream science finds uncomfortable. It suggests purpose where we prefer to see accident. It implies sophisticated understanding of physics where we prefer to see primitive superstition. It raises the possibility that ancient builders knew things we have only recently rediscovered, and perhaps knew things we have not yet figured out. But the data does not care about our comfort. The data shows what the data shows. Perfect helical coils, kilometre-deep shafts, cubic chambers of enormous size. Either the data is wrong, and somehow 4 independent satellite systems all made the same unlikely error, or the data is right, and we must revise our understanding of what lies beneath the sands of Egypt. The technique that revealed these structures continues to improve. When Biondi first began processing Cosmosky-Med data over Giza in the early 2020s, the resolution was limited. The images were suggestive but not definitive. Each year, as more data accumulated and algorithms improved, the clarity increased. What began as blurry anomalies sharpened into distinct geometric forms. What seemed like possible voids revealed themselves as precisely engineered shafts, and the depth estimates grew more extreme with each refinement. Initial analyses suggested structures extending perhaps 100 meters down, then 200, then 500. The current estimates, based on the most recent data processed through the most sophisticated algorithms, indicate depths exceeding 1,000 meters. This is more than half a mile straight down. This is deeper than many modern mines. This is a vertical distance so great that temperature begins to increase noticeably from geothermal heat. Whatever is down there, whoever built it, they were operating on a scale that defies easy explanation. The listening continues. Every day, satellites pass over the Giza plateau. Every pass collects more data. Every byte feeds into algorithms that grow more refined with each iteration. The picture beneath the pyramids becomes clearer, and the questions become more pressing. What kind of civilization builds a kilometre underground? What did they know that we have forgotten? What might we find if we actually descend into those spiralling shafts? The Earth has been answering these questions all along, vibrating its secrets into the thin skin of rock we walk upon. We simply lack the instruments to listen. Now we have them. And what we're hearing is a story far stranger than we ever expected. 8 spirals into darkness. Let us descend now in imagination into the structures that Filippo Biondi's satellites have revealed. Let us follow the data downward from the base of the Khafra pyramid into territory no human eye has seen in recorded history, and perhaps no human eye has ever seen. The Khafra pyramid stands 471 feet tall, the second largest of the 3 Great Pyramids that dominate the Giza Plateau. To tourists approaching from Cairo, it often appears taller than its neighbour, the Great Pyramid of Khufu, because it sits on higher ground and retains some of its original limestone casing at the peak. For thousands of years, we believed we knew what lay beneath this monument. Bedrock. Perhaps some foundation chambers. Perhaps some exploratory tunnels carved by ancient builders seeking suitable stone. We were wrong. According to the seismography data, the visible pyramid is not a structure sitting on the ground. It is a structure sitting on top of 8 vertical shafts that plunge into the earth like the roots of an impossible tree. These shafts begin at or near the base of the pyramid and descend with relentless geometric precision straight down through limestone bedrock that formed millions of years ago. 8 shafts. Not 7, not 9, but 8, arranged in a pattern that suggests deliberate design rather than random chance. 8 is a number that appears repeatedly in sacred geometry and ancient symbolism. The octagon, the 8-pointed star, the 8 trigrams of the I Ching, the Noble Eightfold Path of Buddhism. Whether this numerical choice has meaning or is merely coincidence, the precision of the arrangement leaves little doubt that it was intentional. Each shaft is not a simple hole in the rock. Each one is a complex structure in itself. The scans reveal hollow cylindrical volumes with central columns running down their axis, and wrapped around those central columns, in formations that Biondi describes as perfect helical coils, are structures that spiral downward into the darkness below. Picture a lighthouse with a spiral staircase winding around a central support column. Now imagine that lighthouse is inverted, pointing down into the earth instead of up into the sky. Now imagine 8 of them, arranged around the base of a pyramid, each one descending more than 3,000 feet into the bedrock. This is what the satellites see. The helical coils are perhaps the most enigmatic feature of these structures. A helix is a 3-dimensional curve that maintains a constant angle to its central axis, while advancing along that axis. Think of a spring. Think of a corkscrew. Think of the spiral binding on a notebook. The mathematics of a helix are elegant and precise. The geometry requires intention. You cannot accidentally create a helix. You cannot erosionally carve a helix. You cannot geologically precipitate a helix. Biondi addressed this directly when questioned about natural explanations. 100% man-made, he said. You do not find perfect coils like this in geology. The perfection he references is visible in the data. These are not approximate spirals, not vaguely coiled formations that might be mistaken for natural features if you squint hard enough. These are geometrically precise helices that maintain their angular relationship to the central column throughout their descent. The kind of precision that implies measurement, calculation, engineering, and the scale of this engineering staggers the mind. 3,500 feet, more than 1 kilometre. If you laid this distance horizontally, you could walk it in perhaps 15 minutes at a normal pace. But vertical distance is not like horizontal distance. Vertical distance fights gravity with every inch. Vertical distance requires support against collapse. Vertical distance into solid rock requires excavation of material that has nowhere easy to go. Consider what it would take to drill a shaft 1 kilometre deep today, with modern technology. We have tunnel boring machines that can chew through rock at rates of dozens of meters per day. We have diamond-tipped drill bits and hydraulic excavators, and sophisticated ventilation systems and electric lighting, and computerized monitoring. And still, deep underground construction is one of the most challenging engineering tasks we undertake. Subway tunnels regularly run over budget and behind schedule. Mining operations calculate profitability based partly on how deep they must go. Every additional meter of depth adds cost and complexity. The deepest mine in the world, the Mponeng gold mine in South Africa, reaches depths of about 4 kilometers. But Mponeng is a sprawling complex with multiple shafts, decades of development, billions of dollars of investment, and industrial infrastructure that would be visible from space. The shafts beneath Giza are single vertical structures, 8 of them, each more than 1 kilometer deep, with no surface infrastructure visible, no spoil piles of excavated rock, no evidence of the massive engineering effort that would have been required to create them. Unless, of course, that evidence has been hidden by time. Unless the surface traces have been buried by sand and erased by millennia. Unless we have been walking over the entrances to these structures for centuries without recognizing them for what they are. The debris-filled shafts between the Sphinx and the Khafra Pyramid show up in the scans as direct access routes into the deeper complex. This detail from Beyondi's interview hints at how exploration might eventually proceed. The shafts are not pristine open passages waiting to be descended. They are filled with rubble, with sand, with the accumulated detritus of ages. But they exist. They connect the surface to the depths, and with sufficient excavation, they could potentially be cleared. What would we find if we cleared them? The scans suggest that the 8 helical shafts converge as they descend. Like the roots of a tree spreading out near the surface but joining into a trunk below, these shafts approach each other as they go deeper, and at their convergence point, more than 1,000 meters beneath the pyramid, they meet at 2 enormous cubic chambers. A cube is perhaps the simplest 3-dimensional geometric form. 6 square faces, 12 edges, 8 vertices. Perfect symmetry in 3 dimensions. In sacred geometry, the cube represents the earth element, stability, foundation, the material world. It is also one of the 5 Platonic solids, shapes that fascinated ancient Greek mathematicians because of their perfect regularity. Each of the cubic chambers beneath Khafra measures approximately 260 feet on a side. Let that dimension settle in your mind. 260 feet is nearly the length of a football field. 260 feet cubed is a volume of over 17 million cubic feet. If these chambers exist, if the satellite data is accurate, then hidden beneath the Egyptian sand are enclosed spaces larger than most buildings on the surface of the earth. The Great Pyramid's King's Chamber, which has awed visitors for millennia, measures approximately 34 feet by 17 feet by 19 feet. It is considered one of the most remarkable interior spaces in ancient architecture. The chambers that Beyondi's scans suggest exist beneath Giza are roughly 100 times larger by volume. What could such chambers contain? What purpose could they serve? Why would anyone build them so deep, so large, so far from light and air and the living world above? We do not know. The satellites can show us that something exists, but they cannot show us what that something is. The density variations that indicate void versus solid cannot tell us whether those voids contain artifacts or atmosphere or water, or something else entirely. The geometry reveals design but not purpose. The scale reveals ambition but not meaning. Speculation naturally fills the vacuum of knowledge. Some researchers have suggested that the helical structures might be related to energy generation or transmission. Coils wrapped around columns evoke images of electrical transformers, of magnetic flux, of the careful management of invisible forces. Others have proposed that the chambers might be repositories, storage facilities for objects or information deemed too precious or too dangerous to leave on the surface. Still others wonder. Whether the entire complex might have served some ritual or spiritual function we can barely imagine. A physical manifestation of cosmological beliefs we have not yet deciphered. Beyondy himself has been cautious about interpretation. He is a radar engineer, not an archaeologist or a historian. His expertise lies in detecting structures, not in explaining them. but he has allowed himself some speculation about the helical geometry. These structures might be related to information, he suggested. Information and energy. The precision of the coils, the depth of the shafts, the convergence at the massive chambers below, all of it points towards some kind of functional purpose beyond mere burial or monument. Information is everything, he said. This cryptic phrase echoes through the mystery of what lies beneath Giza. In our modern world, we store information in magnetic patterns on hard drives, in optical patterns on disks, in electrical charges in solid-state memory. But there are other ways to encode information. DNA uses molecular patterns, crystals use atomic arrangements, and some theorists have proposed that information might be encoded in quantum states, in the fundamental fabric of space-time itself. Could the structures beneath Giza encode information in their geometry? Could the helical coils be a form of storage medium we do not yet understand? Could the kilometre-deep shafts serve as conduits for signals we have not yet learned to receive? These questions push against the boundaries of scientific conservatism. They venture into territory where evidence thins and imagination takes over. And yet the questions arise naturally from the data. 8 spiral shafts descending to enormous chambers is not a random formation. It is not a natural feature misinterpreted by over-eager researchers. It is either the most elaborate hoax in the history of satellite imaging, perpetrated simultaneously by 4 independent space agencies, or it is a genuine archaeological anomaly that demands explanation. The world above the chambers knows nothing of their existence. Tourists photograph the pyramids every day, stand on the stones that cap these impossible depths, and return home with no inkling of what might lie beneath their feet. Egyptologists give lectures about burial practices and pharaonic dynasties without mentioning the possibility that everything they describe is merely the visible portion of something far more extensive. But the data exists now. It has been shared publicly on podcasts and in interviews. The scientific papers documenting the methodology are available on preprint servers. The images, crude as they may be compared to what direct exploration might reveal, are circulating through channels that establishment gatekeepers cannot control. The spiral shafts beneath Khafra no longer belong solely to whatever civilization created them. They belong to anyone with the curiosity to examine the evidence and the courage to ask what it means. 8 pathways into darkness. 8 helices carved through stone that remembers the age of dinosaurs. 8 invitations to descend into a realm where our assumptions about the past dissolve and something stranger waits to be understood. The descent has not yet begun in physical terms. No human has climbed down into those shafts or walked across the floors of those chambers, but the descent has begun in conceptual terms. We are falling already, dropping through layers of certainty that once seemed solid, approaching depths where the light of conventional knowledge fails, and new illumination becomes necessary. And at the bottom of that fall, in cubic rooms larger than cathedrals, the answers wait in darkness. The Gran Sasso proof. In science, the most beautiful theory can be destroyed by a single ugly fact. Conversely, the most outlandish claim can be elevated to serious consideration by a single compelling validation. When Filippo Biondi turned his satellite imaging technology toward the pyramids of Giza, he knew that his findings would be dismissed as fantasy unless he could demonstrate that his methodology actually worked. So he looked for a test case. He needed a location where large underground structures existed, where their dimensions were precisely known, where no ambiguity remained about what lay beneath the surface. He needed a place where his technique could either prove itself or fail spectacularly, with no room for excuse or equivocation. He found it in the mountains of central Italy. The Gran Sasso National Laboratory is the largest underground physics laboratory in the world. It sits deep within the Gran Sasso d'Italia, a massive limestone mountain in the Apennine Range, approximately 125 miles from Rome. The laboratory was constructed in the 1980s to provide a shielded environment for experiments that require protection from cosmic radiation. When particles from deep space strike the Earth's atmosphere, they create showers of secondary radiation that penetrate most buildings with ease. But a kilometre of solid rock blocks nearly all of this radiation, making deep underground facilities ideal for sensitive physics experiments. The main experimental halls at Gran Sasso measure 100 metres long, 20 metres wide, and 18 metres high. There are 3 of them, running parallel to each other like the fingers of a giant buried hand. Connecting tunnels and smaller chambers add to the complex. The total underground volume exceeds approximately 180,000 cubic metres. Every dimension has been surveyed. Every corner has been mapped. Every metre of the facility exists in engineering drawings and construction records. This is the target Biondi chose for his blind test. The logic was simple. If his SR Doppler tomography technique could accurately detect and characterise the Gran Sasso laboratory from orbit through more than a kilometre of mountain rock, then the technique was real. If it failed, if it showed structures where none existed or failed to show structures that were definitely there, then his claims about Giza would carry no weight. We did measurements of the Gran Sasso d'Italia Physics Laboratory, Biondi explained in his interview with Jesse Michaels. Our measurements and the reality match 100%. 100%. Not approximately. Not within reasonable margins. 100%. This is an extraordinary claim, and it deserves careful examination. What exactly did the satellite data show? How was the comparison made? What do we mean when we say that measurements match reality? The Gran Sasso Laboratory was built along the route of a highway tunnel that passes through the mountain. The tunnel itself is about 10 kilometres long, connecting the towns of L'Aquila and Teramo on opposite sides of the massif. The physics laboratories branch off from this main tunnel, carved into the rock beside it. The depth of rock overburden varies throughout the facility, but reaches approximately 1,400 metres at the deepest points. This depth is significant. 1,400 metres is similar to the depths that Biondi claims for the structures beneath Giza. If his technique works at Gran Sasso, it should work at similar depths elsewhere. The physics of seismic wave propagation and surface micro-movement detection does not change because you are in Italy instead of Egypt. Rock is rock. Vibrations are vibrations. The mathematics that reveals one hidden chamber should reveal another. Biondi processed satellite radar data collected over the Gran Sasso region using the same algorithms and techniques he later applied to Giza. The satellites were not told what to look for. The processing did not assume anything about what structures might exist. The data was analysed blind, in the scientific sense of that term, meaning that the analysis proceeded without reference to the known answer. And when the results emerged, they showed the 3 experimental halls exactly where they should be. The dimensions matched, the positions matched, the orientations matched. The technique had looked through a kilometre of mountain and seen what human engineers had built there decades earlier. This is the knockout punch that Biondi delivers to his critics. When skeptics like Zahi Hawass dismiss the Giza findings as impossible, when they insist that no radar technology can image structures at such depths, they must now explain how the same technology accurately mapped Gran Sasso. Was that also impossible? Was that also fake news? Did 4 satellite systems simultaneously hallucinate the existence of a physics laboratory that anyone can visit and verify with their own eyes? The Gran Sasso validation creates what philosophers of science call a transfer of credibility. If a method works in one case where we can check the results, we have reason to trust it in other cases where checking is more difficult. This is how all scientific instruments earn their authority. We calibrate them against known standards. We test them in controlled conditions. We demonstrate that they produce accurate results when accuracy can be verified. And then we deploy them in unknown territory with confidence that they will continue to work. Biondi's technique has been calibrated against Gran Sasso. It has been tested against a known standard. It has demonstrated accuracy when accuracy could be verified. This does not prove that the Giza findings are correct, but it shifts the burden of proof dramatically. It is no longer sufficient to simply assert that such deep imaging is impossible. It has been shown to be possible. The impossibility claim has been refuted by experimental demonstration. The implications extend beyond the specific question of what lies beneath the pyramids. If SAR Doppler tomography can reliably image structures at kilometre depths, The technique has applications throughout archaeology, geology, mining, and civil engineering. Imagine being able to map underground aquifers without drilling test wells. Imagine detecting tunnels beneath borders without physical inspection. Imagine surveying potential mining sites from orbit before committing to expensive ground operations. The technology that may reveal ancient secrets beneath Egypt could also transform how we understand the hidden world beneath all our feet. But let us remain focused on Giza, because the Gran Sasso validation makes the Egyptian findings far more consequential than they would be otherwise. Without that validation, Beyondi's claims would be interesting speculation, worthy of discussion but not of urgent attention. With that validation, the claims become a scientific puzzle that demands resolution. Consider what the data actually shows. 8 vertical shafts with helical internal structure, descending from the base of the Khafra pyramid to depths exceeding 1,000 meters. 2 cubic chambers measuring approximately 80 meters on each side at the convergence point of those shafts. Similar structures detected beneath the Menkaure pyramid, beneath the Sphinx, and at the distant site of Hawara. If these structures exist, they represent engineering on a scale we have never associated with ancient Egypt. They represent knowledge we have never credited to ancient builders. They represent a chapter of history that has been entirely lost, or suppressed, or simply invisible to every generation since the structures were sealed. If these structures do not exist, if the satellite data is somehow wrong despite its validation at Gran Sasso, then we face a different kind of puzzle. How did 4 independent satellite systems all produce the same false positive? How did the processing algorithms create geometric patterns that look precisely engineered if they correspond to nothing real? How did the Gran Sasso test succeed while the Giza analysis failed? The more parsimonious explanation, the one that requires fewer unlikely coincidences, is that the structures are real. The Gran Sasso proof establishes that the methodology works. The replication across 4 satellite systems establishes that the findings are not artifacts of a single instrument. The geometric precision of the detected structures establishes that they are not natural formations. The depth and scale establish that they are not consistent with any known ancient Egyptian construction. Every pillar of skepticism has been addressed. The technique is validated, the data is replicated, the geology is incompatible with natural explanations. What remains is the uncomfortable conclusion that we have been wrong about Giza for a very long time. This is not a comfortable conclusion for the academic establishment. Couriers have been built on the existing narrative. Textbooks have been written. Museum exhibits have been designed. Doctoral theses have been defended. An entire field of Egyptology has organized itself around certain assumptions about what ancient Egyptians could and could not do. The structures beneath Giza, if they exist, do not fit those assumptions. They suggest capabilities that orthodox history denies. They imply knowledge that orthodox scholarship has not acknowledged. When paradigms shift in science, they rarely do so gracefully. The defenders of the old paradigm do not simply admit they were wrong and welcome the new understanding. They fight, they dismiss, they attack the credentials of those who challenge them. They demand impossible standards of proof while accepting flimsy evidence for their own positions. They invoke authority and tradition and consensus as if these were substitutes for data. We have seen this pattern before. We saw it when continental drift was proposed and geologists insisted that continents could not move. We saw it when bacteria were suggested as the cause of ulcers and physicians insisted that stress and diet were responsible. We saw it when younger researchers challenged established theories in field after field and were mocked until their evidence became undeniable. Beyondai faces this pattern now. His technology works. His data is consistent. His validation is public and reproducible. And yet the establishment response has been dismissal rather than investigation. Zahi Hawass declared the findings fake news within days of their announcement, without conducting any independent analysis, without examining the Gran Sasso validation, without engaging with the methodology at all. This is not how science is supposed to work. Science is supposed to follow evidence wherever it leads. Science is supposed to test claims against reality and update beliefs accordingly. Science is supposed to celebrate discoveries that challenge existing understanding because such discoveries expand human knowledge. But science is conducted by scientists, and scientists are human. They have egos and careers and comfortable assumptions they prefer not to question. They have colleagues whose approval they seek and institutions whose norms they follow. The sociology of science often diverges from its philosophy. What should happen in theory frequently fails to happen in practice. The Gran Sasso proof will not convince everyone. Some will continue to insist that the Giza findings are impossible regardless of what validations are offered. Some will demand physical excavation before they accept anything, knowing that such excavation is unlikely to be approved by Egyptian authorities who have already declared the research baseless. But the proof exists. The technique works. The data shows what it shows. And every day that passes without serious investigation is a day when one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in human history sits beneath the sand, unseen and unexplored, while those with the power to authorize exploration refuse to look. The mountains of Italy have given us a key. That key unlocks a door we did not know existed. What lies behind that door may reshape everything we think we know about our past. We need only the courage to walk through. The gatekeepers and the heretics, within days of Biondi's findings becoming public, Zahi Hawass responded. The former Egyptian Minister of Antiquities, perhaps the most famous Egyptologist in the world, did not request the data for analysis. He did not commission independent testing of the methodology. He did not express cautious interest while awaiting further evidence. He simply declared the discovery to be fake news. All this information is completely wrong and has no scientific basis, Hawass announced. The Ministry of Tourism and Antiquity did not give permission to any individuals or institutions to work inside or outside the Second Pyramid. This response reveals something important about how establishment archaeology approaches challenges to its authority. Note what Hawass did not say. He did not say that he had examined the satellite data and found it wanting. He did not say that he had consulted with radar engineers and determined that the methodology was flawed. He did not say that he had alternative evidence suggesting the structures do not exist. Instead, he said that permission was not given, as if the existence of underground structures depends on whether Egyptian bureaucrats approved the research, as if satellites orbiting hundreds of kilometers above the Earth require permits to collect data, as if reality itself conforms to administrative preferences. The claim about using radar inside the pyramid is false, Hawass continued, and the techniques employed are neither scientifically approved nor validated. But Biondi did not use radar inside the pyramid. His entire methodology is based on measuring surface vibrations from orbit, not penetrating structures with ground-based equipment. Either Hawass misunderstood the technique fundamentally, or he deliberately mischaracterized it to make dismissal easier. Neither possibility reflects well on his role as a scientific gatekeeper. The phrase scientifically approved is particularly revealing. Approved by whom? Science does not have a central approval authority that blesses certain techniques and forbids others. Science has a process of testing, replication, and peer review that establishes which techniques work and which do not. Biondi's technique has been tested against known underground structures and has succeeded. That is the scientific approval that matters. That is the validation that establishes credibility. But Hawass wields a different kind of authority. For decades, he has controlled access to the most significant archaeological sites in Egypt. Researchers who wish to excavate at Giza, who wish to conduct scans inside the pyramids, who wish to explore the passages beneath the Sphinx, must obtain his approval or the approval of his successors who share his views. This is not scientific authority. This is political authority. It does not derive from being right. It derives from controlling access. The sociology of Egyptology as a field cannot be separated from the politics of Egypt as a nation. The pyramids are not merely archaeological curiosities. They are national symbols. They are tourist attractions that generate billions of dollars in revenue. They are sources of pride for a country that has often struggled to find its place in the modern world. The narrative that Egyptians built these monuments, that they represent the genius of an indigenous civilization, that they are the heritage of the Egyptian people, is deeply important to national identity. Challenges to this narrative, regardless of their scientific merit, encounter resistance that has little to do with evidence and everything to do with politics. The suggestion that ancient Egyptians might not have built the visible pyramids, or that the visible pyramids might be merely the surface expression of something built by someone else, threatens the story that Egypt tells itself about its past. Zahi Hawass has positioned himself as the defender of that story. He has built a career on asserting Egyptian ownership of ancient Egyptian achievements. He has attacked researchers who suggest alternative construction methods, earlier dating, or non-Egyptian influence. He has used his administrative power to deny access to those whose findings might complicate the orthodox narrative. This is not unique to Egyptology. Every academic field has its gatekeepers, its orthodoxies, its mechanisms for suppressing heterodox ideas. What makes Egyptology unusual is the combination of scientific questions with nationalist politics, creating a situation where challenging a theory about ancient construction becomes equivalent to insulting an entire nation. The researchers whose findings are heretical pay a price for their heresy. They are denied access to the sites they wish to study. They are excluded from mainstream journals and conferences. Their credentials are questioned regardless of their qualifications. Their motivations are impugned regardless of their sincerity. Biondi faces this now. Despite his position at a respected university, despite his peer-reviewed publications, despite his validated methodology, he is being treated as a crank rather than a scientist. The evidence he has gathered is being dismissed without examination. The technique he developed is being mischaracterized as impossible, despite its demonstrated success. The whole history of science is the history of heretical thinking moving science forward, Jesse Meisels observed during the interview. Scientific paradigm shifts occur when there is a build-up of anomalies, and then the dam breaks. This insight from the philosophy of science, associated primarily with Thomas Kuhn's work on scientific revolutions, describes how fields actually change. Normal science proceeds within an accepted framework, solving puzzles that the framework defines. But anomalies accumulate. Findings that do not fit the framework pile up. For a while, they are dismissed as errors or set aside as problems for future research. But eventually, the weight of anomalies becomes too great. A new framework emerges that accounts for what the old framework could not explain, and the field shifts often suddenly from the old paradigm to the new. We may be approaching such a shift in our understanding of ancient Egypt. The structures beneath Giza are not the only anomaly. The precision of the Great Pyramid's construction exceeds what conventional tools should have allowed. The alignment with true north is accurate to a fraction of a degree. The internal chambers show evidence of machining that copper tools could not produce. The logistics of moving and placing millions of multi-ton blocks within a single pharaoh's reign strain plausibility. Each of these anomalies has been explained away individually, attributed to exceptional skill or lucky circumstances or methods we have not yet figured out. But collectively, they suggest that our model of ancient Egyptian capability is incomplete at best and fundamentally wrong at worst. The underground structures, if confirmed, would not be merely another anomaly added to the pile. They would be an anomaly so large, so incompatible with existing explanations, that the pile would collapse under their weight. You cannot explain away 8-kilometre deep spiral shafts with helical geometry as exceptional skill with copper chisels. You cannot attribute cubic chambers the size of aircraft hangars to the organisational genius of pharaonic administration. These structures, if they exist, require technological capabilities that we have never attributed to any ancient civilization. Heresia in Italian. In Latin, it means to be free, Biondi noted during the interview. Everyone has to be open-minded. The word heresy carries religious connotations that are apt here. Orthodox Egyptology functions in some ways like a religion. It has sacred texts, the writings of founding figures whose interpretations are treated as authoritative. It has priests, the credentialed experts who guard access to mysteries and pronounce judgment on claims of revelation. It has believers, the public who accepts what the priests tell them because they lack the expertise to evaluate evidence independently. And it has heretics, those who challenge the official doctrines and suffer excommunication as a result. But religions change too. Doctrines that seemed eternal are revised. Practices that seemed essential are abandoned. What one generation considers heresy, the next generation may embrace as truth. The history of ideas is littered with examples of heretics who were later vindicated, whose suppressed insights eventually became mainstream understanding. The question is how long the vindication takes and how much damage is done in the interim. Galileo was forced to recant his heliocentric views under threat of torture, and it took the Catholic Church over 300 years to formally acknowledge that he was right. Continental drift was proposed in the early 20th century and not accepted until the 1960s. The bacterial cause of ulcers was demonstrated in the 1980s and not widely adopted until years of unnecessary surgery had been performed on patients who could have been cured with antibiotics. How long will it take for the structures beneath Giza to be accepted, assuming they exist? How many years will pass while data that could revolutionize our understanding of human history sits unexamined because gatekeepers refuse to look? How much knowledge will remain buried because those with the power to authorize excavation prefer comfortable ignorance to uncomfortable discovery? Biondi has submitted a formal proposal to Egyptian authorities requesting permission to physically explore the detected structures. If approved, excavation could begin in 2026. The debris-filled shafts near the Sphinx could be cleared. Cameras could descend into darkness. Human eyes could see what satellites have detected. But approval is far from certain. The same establishment that has declared the findings fake news controls the approval process. The same voices that have dismissed the methodology without examination will decide whether examination is permitted. The gatekeepers who guard the orthodox narrative are being asked to open their gates to heretics who would tear that narrative down. There is a kind of courage required to challenge entrenched power with nothing but evidence. Biondi has shown that courage. He has published his methodology. He has validated his technique. He has shared his findings publicly, inviting scrutiny from anyone qualified to provide it. He has done what scientists are supposed to do. The response from the establishment has been to close ranks, to invoke authority, to dismiss without engaging. This is not what scientists are supposed to do. This is what institutions do when they feel threatened. This is what power does when it senses that its foundations are crumbling. History will eventually render judgment on who was right and who was wrong. The structures either exist or they do not. Future technology will eventually penetrate the ambiguity, whether through improved satellite imaging, through approved excavation, or through some method we have not yet invented. The truth is patient. It does not require our belief to continue being true. But history will also render judgment on how the scientific community responded to these findings. Did researchers examine the evidence with open minds? Did institutions facilitate investigation or obstruct it? Did the guardians of knowledge guard it faithfully, or did they guard their own positions at knowledge's expense? The answers to those questions are being written right now, in the responses of every Egyptologist who reads Biondi's data, in the decisions of every official who processes his proposals, in the coverage of every journalist who reports on the controversy. Heretics have often been proven right, but they have also often been silenced before they could gather enough evidence to overcome resistance. The structures beneath Giza may be one of the most important discoveries in archaeological history, or they may remain controversial speculation for another generation, not because the evidence is lacking, but because the courage to face that evidence is in short supply. The gatekeepers hold their positions, the heretics push at their gates. And beneath the sand, in darkness that has not known light for millennia or longer, the truth waits for someone brave enough to seek it. Whispers of a Menti. Long before satellites orbited the Earth, long before radar engineers developed techniques to listen to the planet's vibrations, long before the scientific method existed as a formal discipline, people told stories about what lay beneath the pyramids. These stories were dismissed for centuries as mythology, as superstition, as the imaginative fantasies of pre-scientific minds. But myths have a peculiar way of encoding truths that rational discourse overlooks. and the myths surrounding Giza speak of something hidden underground, with a consistency that now seems less like fantasy and more like memory. The ancient Egyptians believed in a realm called Amenti. The word derives from the Egyptian term for the west, the direction of the setting sun, the place where light goes to die each evening before being reborn at dawn. But Amenti was more than a cardinal direction. It was a dimension, a state of being, a place where souls travelled after death to be judged and transformed. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the journey to Amenti is described in vivid detail. The deceased must navigate through gates guarded by supernatural beings. They must answer questions correctly to proceed. They must pass tests of character and knowledge. The path is not simple. It winds through chambers and corridors, through darkness and light, through trials that separate those worthy of eternal life from those condemned to oblivion. The halls of Amenti, as they came to be known in later esoteric traditions, were said to exist beneath the Giza Plateau, not metaphorically, not symbolically, physically. Underground chambers where initiates underwent transformation, where secrets were kept, where the boundary between the living and the dead grew thin enough to cross. Modern scholars have generally treated these accounts as religious allegory. The journey through Amenti was understood as a spiritual metaphor, not a literal underground voyage. The chambers and corridors were psychological states, not architectural features. The entire mythology was interpreted through frameworks that assumed ancient peoples could not distinguish between inner experience and outer reality. But what if the mythology was describing something real? The structures that Beyondie's satellites have detected, 8 spiral shafts descending more than a kilometre into the Earth, converging on enormous cubic chambers in the darkness below, sound remarkably like the halls of Amenti translated into engineering terms. Helical pathways leading downward, vast enclosed spaces at the bottom, a hidden realm beneath the visible monuments that only the initiated could access. The coincidence is striking enough to warrant serious consideration. Either the ancient stories were pure invention that happened to match what modern technology has found, or the ancient stories were descriptions of something that actually existed, passed down through generations in the only language available to pre-scientific cultures, the language of myth and religion. Edgar Cayce, the American psychic who gave thousands of readings in the early 20th century, spoke repeatedly about a hall of records hidden at Giza. Cayce claimed that survivors of Atlantis, fleeing the destruction of their civilization around 10,500 BCE, brought their accumulated knowledge to Egypt and stored it in a secret chamber near the Sphinx. This hall of records, he said, contained the history of humanity from its earliest beginnings, preserved against the catastrophe that had destroyed the Atlantean homeland. Cayce predicted that the hall would be discovered when humanity was ready to receive its contents, a time he associated with dramatic global changes and shifts in consciousness. He described the entrance as being near the right paw of the Sphinx, accessible through passages that connected to the pyramid complex. For decades, Cayce's readings were treated as curiosities at best, delusions at worst. No physical evidence supported his claims. Excavations around the Sphinx found no hidden entrances. The Hall of Records remained firmly in the category of paranormal speculation, interesting to believers but irrelevant to serious archaeology. And then the satellite scans showed a massive, shaft structure beneath the Sphinx, connected to the underground network that extends beneath all 3 pyramids. The correlation between Cayce's descriptions and Beyondie's data does not prove that Cayce was receiving genuine psychic information. It does not prove that Atlantis existed or that refugees stored their knowledge beneath Egypt. But it does suggest that the tradition of hidden chambers at Giza, whether accessed through psychic channels or preserved through ancient myths, may have a physical basis that we're only now able to detect. The Emerald Tablets of Thoth represent another strand of this tradition. These texts, which claim to be translations of ancient writings by the Egyptian god Thoth, describe the halls of Amenti in detail that goes far beyond the canonical Egyptian sources. Thoth, in these accounts, was not merely a deity, but an Atlantean priest-king who oversaw the construction of the Giza complex and encoded within it knowledge meant to survive ages of darkness. In the Emerald Tablets, the halls of Amenti are described as interdimensional spaces, existing both physically beneath the earth and in realms accessible only to consciousness properly prepared. The Lords of Amenti, beings of vast wisdom and power, were said to dwell in these halls, guiding the evolution of humanity across vast spans of time. Academic scholars dismiss the Emerald Tablets as 20th century fabrications, noting that the earliest known versions appeared in the 1930s through a figure named Maurice Doreal, who claimed to have translated them from ancient sources. The provenance is certainly questionable. The language reflects theosophical and New Age concepts that were circulating at the time. The historical claims cannot be verified through conventional archaeology. And yet, the tablets describe underground chambers beneath Giza, accessed through spiral passages, containing knowledge and perhaps technology from a civilization older than dynastic Egypt. They describe geometric structures of precise design, serving functions related to energy and consciousness. They describe exactly what Biondi satellites appear to have found. This does not mean the Emerald Tablets are authentic ancient documents. It may mean that whoever wrote them, whenever they wrote them, had access to traditions or information that preserved genuine knowledge about what exists beneath the pyramids. Myths can be invented wholesale, but they can also be elaborations on a core of truth, embroidered by imagination but anchored in reality. The figure of Thoth himself deserves attention in this context. In Egyptian mythology, Thoth was the god of wisdom, writing, magic, and the moon. He was credited with inventing hieroglyphics, with maintaining the universe through his knowledge, with recording the judgments of souls in the afterlife. His Greek equivalent was Hermes, and the synthesis of these figures produced Hermes Trismegistus, the legendary author of the Hermetic texts that so influenced Western esoteric traditions. Thoth was associated with Giza from the earliest periods. Some traditions held that he designed the pyramids, that he encoded within them mathematical and astronomical knowledge, that he created the Sphinx as a guardian of secrets too powerful for ordinary humanity to possess. Whether understood as a god, a deified king, a symbolic representation of priestly knowledge, or something else entirely, Thoth represents the persistent belief that intelligence and intention lie behind the monuments of Giza, and that their true purpose remains hidden. The Atlantis connection runs through all these threads. Plato first described Atlantis in his dialogues, presenting it as a powerful island civilization destroyed by earthquakes and floods around 9600 BCE. Whether Plato intended this as historical record, philosophical allegory, or something in between has been debated for 2 millennia. But the story resonated deeply, generating endless speculation about where Atlantis might have been and what might have survived its destruction. The idea that Atlantean survivors brought their knowledge to Egypt, encoding it in monuments designed to endure millennia, appears in numerous sources from the 19th century onward. Ignatius Donnelly's 1882 book Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, argued this case extensively, suggesting that Egyptian civilization represented a colony or continuation of Atlantean culture. Similar ideas appear in the writings of theosophists, occultists, and alternative historians throughout the 20th century. These ideas have been dismissed by mainstream scholarship as pseudo-history, as wishful thinking, as the projection of modern anxieties onto ancient monuments, and perhaps they are. Perhaps the entire tradition of hidden knowledge at Giza is a collective fantasy, a conspiracy of imagination spanning centuries and continents, with no basis in physical reality. But the satellites do not deal in fantasy. The radar returns do not reflect wishful thinking. The data that shows 8 spiral shafts descending to enormous chambers beneath the Khafra pyramid is not influenced by whether the observer believes in Atlantis or Thoth or the halls of Amenti. The structures either exist or they do not, and the evidence increasingly suggests that they exist. If they exist, then the myths were not merely imaginative inventions. They were descriptions, garbled perhaps, embroidered certainly, but anchored in something real. The traditions that spoke of hidden chambers and secret knowledge and underground realms were not pure fantasy. They were attempts to preserve memory of what lay beneath the sands, using the conceptual frameworks available to their times. This does not validate every claim made about Giza. It does not mean that crystal skulls or alien visitors or interdimensional portals are real. But it does suggest that we should approach ancient traditions with more humility than modern rationalism typically allows. The ancestors who built myths around these monuments may have known things we have forgotten. Their stories may contain information that our sciences are only now recovering. The whispers of Amenti have persisted for thousands of years. They have been dismissed, ridiculed, relegated to the margins of respectable discourse. But whispers do not persist without reason. Something kept these stories alive through all the centuries when they could not be verified. Something ensured that each generation passed them to the next, modified in detail, but consistent in essence. Now we have instruments that can test the whispers against reality. We have satellites that can see through stone. We have algorithms that can reconstruct hidden geometry from surface vibrations. We have the technology to determine whether the halls of Amenti are myth or memory. The answer, according to 4 independent satellite systems analysing the Giza Plateau, is that something very much like the halls of Amenti exists exactly where the myths said it would. The whispers were not lies. They were prophecies waiting for a future capable of understanding them. The Sphinx keeps its secrets. It crouches on the Giza Plateau like a question mark carved in stone. A lion's body with a human head, worn by wind and sand and time, gazing eternally toward the eastern horizon where the sun rises each morning. The Great Sphinx has watched over Egypt for so long that even the ancient Egyptians considered it ancient. When Thutmose IV cleared sand from around its base 3,400 years ago, he was already restoring a monument whose origins had faded into legend. What is the Sphinx? Who built it? When? Why? These questions have never been satisfactorily answered. The orthodox position holds that Pharaoh Khafra commissioned the Sphinx around 2500 BCE, carving it from the limestone bedrock left over from quarrying stone for his pyramid. The face is said to represent Khafra himself, though the features have been so damaged over millennia that identification is uncertain. The purpose is assumed to be protective or commemorative, a guardian figure watching over the necropolis. But this orthodox position rests on circumstantial evidence. No contemporary inscription mentions the Sphinx's construction. No records from Khafra's reign discuss carving a giant lion from the living rock. The attribution to Khafra is based primarily on proximity. The Sphinx sits near his pyramid and on a damaged inscription from Thutmose's era that may or may not contain Khafra's name. Alternative researchers have long argued that the Sphinx is far older than orthodox Egyptology allows. John Anthony West, following observations by the geologist Robert Schoch, pointed out that the erosion patterns on the Sphinx's body appear to be caused by water, not wind and sand. The vertical fissures in the limestone, the rounded surfaces, the particular patterns of weathering all suggest prolonged exposure to rainfall, the kind of rainfall that Egypt has not experienced since the end of the last ice age, more than 10,000 years ago. If the Sphinx was carved before the rain stopped, it would predate dynastic Egypt by thousands of years. It would predate the supposed construction of the pyramids by millennia. It would imply that a sophisticated civilization capable of monumental sculpture existed in the Nile Valley, long before history records any such civilization. This water erosion hypothesis has been vigorously disputed by Egyptologists, who offer alternative explanations for the weathering patterns and insist that the Sphinx cannot be separated from its 4th dynasty context. The debate has continued for decades without resolution, each side accusing the other of ignoring evidence and motivated reasoning. But now a new kind of evidence has entered the conversation. Beyondi's satellite scans detected the same spiral shaft signature beneath the Sphinx that appears beneath the pyramids, a single massive structure plunging down from beneath the ancient monument into the depths below. The Sphinx, it seems, is not merely sitting on bedrock. It is sitting on top of something, a shaft, a passage, an entrance to the underground complex that connects all the major monuments of the plateau. The debris-filled shafts between the Sphinx and Khafra show up in the scans as direct access routes into the deeper complex Biondi noted. The implications of this statement are profound. If accurate, it means that the Sphinx and the pyramids are not separate monuments that happen to share a plateau. They're components of a single integrated system, connected underground by passages that have been sealed and forgotten for unknown ages. This is not entirely new information. Various shafts and tunnels associated with the Sphinx have been known for over a century. The Osiris shaft, discovered in the 1930s by Selim Hassan and more thoroughly explored by Zahi Hawass in 1999, descends about 30 metres beneath the causeway connecting the Sphinx to Khafra's pyramid. It contains 3 levels of chambers, the lowest flooded with groundwater, and a massive granite sarcophagus that was found empty. Hawass called the Osiris shaft his favourite discovery, a symbolic tomb for the god of the underworld who was believed to rule the underground tunnels of Giza. He dated the construction to around 500 BCE, more than 2,000 years after the Sphinx was supposedly carved, and considered it unrelated to the original function of the monuments, but the Osiris shaft may be merely the shallow portion of something that goes much deeper. The satellite scans suggest that beneath the known chambers, beneath the flooded corridors that exploration has reached, there are structures extending far beyond what any excavation has touched. The 30 metres of the Osiris shaft may be the first 30 metres of a system that descends for over 1,000. The head of the Sphinx contains a shaft as well, a hole in the top of the skull, now covered by a cement cap and trapdoor installed during restorations in the 1920s, leads down into the monument's interior. How deep this shaft extends, whether it connects to other passages, what purpose it originally served, remain uncertain. Various explorers over the centuries have noted its existence, but no thorough investigation has been permitted. There are passages in the Sphinx's body too. A tunnel extending from the rear of the monument was discovered during excavations in 1926, but then sealed and largely forgotten. Another passage near the north flank was noted by 19th century explorers. The extent of these internal features has never been fully mapped, and access has been restricted to prevent damage to the fragile limestone. The Sphinx, in other words, is not a solid sculpture. It is riddled with voids. Some of these voids have been explored, others have been sealed, and beneath them all, according to the satellite data, lies a shaft of the same type that descends beneath the pyramids. What does this mean for our understanding of the monument? If the Sphinx was carved during the 4th dynasty as a guardian figure for Khafra's tomb, why would it contain passages leading underground? Tomb guardians do not typically require internal architecture. They are symbolic figures, not functional structures. The presence of shafts and tunnels suggests a purpose beyond mere symbolism, a purpose connected to whatever system the underground complex served. If the Sphinx predates the 4th dynasty, if it was carved during an earlier era by a civilization we do not recognize, then its connection to the underground complex makes more sense. The monument would not be a guardian added to an existing pyramid field. It would be an integral component of a facility designed from the beginning to incorporate both surface structures and subterranean chambers. The face might have been recarved by later pharaohs, the body might have been damaged and repaired repeatedly, but the original function would persist beneath all the modifications. Edgar Cayce claimed that the Hall of Records would be found near the right paw of the Sphinx. Researchers inspired by his readings have argued for decades that excavation in this area should be permitted to test the claim. Egyptian authorities have consistently refused, citing concerns about damaging the monument. The refusal has fueled conspiracy theories about cover-ups and suppressed discoveries, theories that the establishment dismisses as paranoid nonsense. But now, satellite data suggests that Cayce may have been pointing towards something real. Not necessarily a library of Atlantean scrolls, but perhaps an entrance to the underground system that connects the Sphinx to the pyramids and descends to chambers more than a kilometre below. The right paw sits in exactly the area where the scans show structures trending downward toward the deeper complex. Coincidence can explain much, but at some point the accumulation of coincidences begins to suggest pattern rather than chance. Ancient myths describe hidden chambers at Giza. Psychics claim to perceive underground libraries. Geologists note erosion patterns suggesting extreme age. Engineers note shafts and tunnels throughout the Sphinx. And now satellites detect spiral structures beneath the monument connecting to a vast underground network. Each piece of evidence can be dismissed individually. The myths are just myths. The psychics were just guessing. The erosion has alternative explanations. The known passages are just shallow features. The satellite data must be misinterpreted, but dismissing everything requires dismissing quite a lot. It requires believing that all these independent lines of evidence, spanning thousands of years and multiple disciplines, all happen to point toward the same false conclusion. It requires coincidence so elaborate that the alternative, that something actually exists beneath the Sphinx and the pyramids, begins to seem more parsimonious. The Sphinx continues to gaze eastward, as it has for millennia. Its damaged face reveals nothing. Its limestone body keeps its secrets. The passages within it lead to sealed doors and flooded chambers, and darkness that no modern eye has penetrated. But beneath the Sphinx, according to instruments that see what eyes cannot, the secrets continue downward. A shaft of the same geometry detected beneath the pyramids, a connection to the underground complex that links all the monuments of Giza, an entrance, perhaps, to whatever the ancients called the Halls of Amenti. The Guardian keeps its secrets, but the secrets may not be kept forever. The technology that revealed them from orbit may eventually be followed by the courage to explore them directly. And when that exploration happens, we may finally understand why a civilization capable of carving monuments that endure for ages chose to place a lion with a human face above an entrance to the underworld. The Sphinx has watched the sun rise 10,000 times, 10,000 times. It has seen empires rise and fall, has seen the sands advance and retreat, has seen its own features slowly dissolve under the patient assault of wind and time. It has seen everything and said nothing. Perhaps, soon, we will learn what it has been guarding all along. The labyrinth that surpassed the pyramids. 30 miles south of the Giza Plateau, in a region called the Fayum, stands a ruined pyramid that few tourists visit. The Pyramid of Amenemhat III at Hawara is a crumbling mass of mud, brick and stone, a shadow of its former glory, unremarkable compared to the magnificent structures at Giza. Most visitors to Egypt never see it. Most books about ancient Egypt barely mention it. And yet, according to the ancient writers who actually saw the monuments of Egypt in their prime, the complex at Hawara was more impressive than the pyramids themselves. Herodotus visited Egypt around 450 BCE, more than 2,000 years after the pyramids were built. He was a careful observer, a meticulous recorder of what he saw and what he was told. His histories remain one of our primary sources for understanding the ancient Mediterranean world. And when Herodotus encountered the Hawara complex, he was stunned. It surpasses even the pyramids, he wrote. Though the pyramids are beyond words, and each was equal to many great monuments built by Greeks, this labyrinth surpasses even the pyramids. Herodotus described a structure of extraordinary complexity. 12 roofed courts with doors facing each other, 6 facing north and 6 facing south. Passages winding through chambers beyond counting. Upper rooms numbering 1,500, and beneath them, hidden underground chambers that the priest refused to show him. They were, he was told, the burial places of sacred crocodiles and of the kings who had built the labyrinth. Strabo, writing 4 centuries later, confirmed the account. The labyrinth, he said, was a work equal to the pyramids, with courts corresponding to the nomes of Egypt. Pliny the Elder described it as well, noting its underground passages and its reputation as the oldest of the great Egyptian monuments. These were not credulous travellers easily impressed by local legends. These were educated observers from cultures that had produced the Parthenon and the great temples of the Greek world. When they said that the labyrinth surpassed the pyramids, they meant it. Something at Hawara struck them as more impressive than the most famous monuments in the world. But when modern archaeologists excavated the site, they found almost nothing. Flinders Petrie, working at Hawara in 1888, uncovered foundations and fragments. The great structure had been dismantled, its stones quarried for other construction projects over the centuries. Only traces remained of what Herodotus had seen. The labyrinth, if it ever existed in the form he described, had vanished, or so it seemed. In 2008, a team of Belgian and Egyptian researchers conducted a geophysical survey of the Hera site. Using ground-penetrating radar, they scanned the area south of Amenemhat's pyramid, where ancient sources placed the labyrinth. And beneath the sand, invisible to the eye but clear to the instruments, they found it. A massive underground complex, chambers and passages extending far below the surface, structures matching the ancient descriptions in scale and layout. The labyrinth had not vanished. It had been buried. The surface portions had been dismantled, but the underground portions remained, sealed beneath millennia of accumulated sand. The discovery was published, then quietly suppressed. The Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities did not announce the findings. The lead researcher, Louis de Cordier, waited years for official acknowledgement that never came. Finally, in 2010, he released the data publicly through a website, making the discovery available to anyone interested in seeing it. The implications were remarkable. Herodotus had mentioned underground chambers that the priests would not let him enter. The radar had found extensive underground structures beneath the site. The ancient testimony and the modern technology aligned perfectly. Whatever the labyrinth was, however it functioned, it appeared to be real. Now, fast forward to 2025 and Filippo Biondi's satellite scans. The same spiral shaft signature that appears beneath the Giza pyramids also appears at Hawara. The same geometric patterns, the same indications of engineered structures extending deep into the earth. The labyrinth that surpassed the pyramids is connected to whatever system lies beneath them. This transforms our understanding of ancient Egyptian construction. Giza is not an isolated phenomenon. The underground complex is not limited to the three famous pyramids and the Sphinx. It extends across the landscape, connecting sites separated by dozens of miles, unified by a subterranean network of unknown extent and purpose. What was the labyrinth for? Herodotus was told it contained tombs, burial places for kings and sacred animals. This explanation fits the general Egyptian preoccupation with death and the afterlife. Every major monument seems to be a tomb. Every underground passage leads to a burial chamber. The entire civilization appears organized around the disposition of the dead. But there are problems with this interpretation. The labyrinth's complexity far exceeded what would be necessary for mere burial. 3,000 rooms, according to Herodotus, half above ground and half below. Passages winding through courts and chambers in configurations that bewildered even experienced travellers. Sacred crocodiles entombed alongside kings in underground vaults. Why would a burial complex require such elaboration? Why would priests refuse to show Herodotus the underground portions if they contained only tombs? What function could 1,500 underground chambers serve that required them to be hidden from visiting scholars? The alternative possibility, that the labyrinth served some purpose beyond burial, gained support from its apparent connection to the Giza complex. If the underground structures form a network spanning tens of miles, they were not built for the interment of individual pharaohs. They were built for something that required scale, that required precision, that required the coordinated effort of engineering across vast distances. Christopher Dunn's theory about the Great Pyramid as a power plant, which we will explore in the next chapter, gains circumstantial support from the existence of this network. A single pyramid might plausibly be explained as an elaborate tomb. A single underground chamber might be written off as a peculiarity. But a system of interconnected structures, spanning the landscape, incorporating helical geometry and enormous chambers, begins to suggest infrastructure rather than monument. It begins to suggest function rather than symbol. The ancient writers who described the labyrinth were not merely impressed by its size. They were impressed by its engineering, by its precision, by the evident intelligence that designed such a complex structure. This was not piled stone. This was not accumulated mass. This was architecture of sophistication, that surpassed what the Greeks themselves could produce. Consider what it would take to build such a complex. Underground construction is inherently more difficult than a surface construction. You cannot easily move materials in and out. You cannot easily see what you are doing. You must support the earth above while excavating the earth below. Every cubic metre of removed stone must go somewhere. Every chamber must be reinforced against collapse. Ventilation, drainage, and access must all be engineered. To build 3,000 rooms underground, connected by passages so complex that visitors became lost, would require capabilities that we struggle to attribute to ancient civilizations. The logistics alone are staggering. The planning required approaches the limits of organizational possibility, and yet it was built because Herodotus saw it, because radar has detected it, because the evidence of its existence persists despite the destruction of its surface portions. The labyrinth at Hawara may be the key to understanding what lies beneath Giza. It was accessible to ancient visitors in a way that the deeper structures at Giza apparently were not. Herodotus could enter its courts and passages, could see its upper chambers, could approach the entrances to its underground sections, even if he was denied access to them. The labyrinth was a working facility of some kind, maintained and guarded by priests who understood its function well enough to keep its secrets. If the labyrinth served the same purpose as the underground complex at Giza, then whatever that purpose was could be partially inferred from what ancient sources tell us about Hawara. The sacred crocodile suggests a religious function. The refusal to allow foreign access suggests secrecy. The scale and complexity suggest importance beyond ordinary burial practice. But these clues only deepen the mystery. What religion requires 3,000 underground chambers? What secrets demand such elaborate protection? What importance justifies construction on a scale that surpassed the pyramids themselves? The answers may lie beneath the sand at Hawara, waiting for excavation that Egyptian authorities have not authorized. Or they may lie in the satellite data that shows the connections between sites, the network that unifies Giza and Hawara, and perhaps other locations yet to be scanned. Or they may lie in texts yet to be discovered, ancient records that describe the true function of these structures in terms we can understand. Herodotus stood at the entrance to the underground chambers and was turned away. 25 centuries later, we stand in the same position. The instruments have shown us that something exists below. The ancient testimony has told us that the priests considered it too important to reveal, and the choice of whether to descend, whether to finally discover what surpassed even the pyramids in the estimation of ancient observers, remains unmade. The labyrinth waits beneath the Fayum as it has waited for millennia. Its upper portions are gone, quarried away by generations who did not know or did not care what they were destroying. But its foundations remain, its underground chambers remain, and its connection to the greater mystery of what lies beneath Egypt remains, a thread that links one impossible discovery to another across the landscape of a past we have barely begun to understand. The machine hypothesis. Christopher Dunn is not an archaeologist. He is not an Egyptologist. He is a machinist, an engineer who has spent 50 years working with precision manufacturing in the aerospace industry. His hands have crafted components that fly in aircraft and orbit in satellites. His eyes have measured tolerances that would be invisible to ordinary vision. His mind has been trained to ask a question that academics often overlook. Why was this built with such precision? When Dunn first examined the Great Pyramid, he was struck by the same thing that strikes every engineer who looks carefully at the structure. The precision is extraordinary. The base is level to within fractions of an inch across 13 acres. The corners are aligned to true north, with an accuracy of 3 arc minutes. The joints between casing stones where they survive fit so tightly that a knife blade cannot be inserted between them. These are not the tolerances of tomb builders, these are the tolerances of machine builders. Conventional Egyptology explains the precision as a product of obsessive craftsmanship and unlimited labour. The pharaohs commanded resources beyond anything available to ordinary construction projects. They could afford to have workers grind and fit stones until perfection was achieved. The result was impressive but not mysterious. Human hands with copper tools and sufficient time can produce remarkable work. Dunn found this explanation inadequate. He knew from his own experience what it takes to achieve such precision. You need measurement systems capable of detecting tiny variations. You need reference surfaces that are themselves precise. You need tools that can remove material with fine control. You need methods for checking and correcting as you go. Copper tools cannot do this with stone. Copper is softer than granite. It deforms under use. It cannot hold an edge. The spiral tool marks visible on Egyptian granite suggest machining with something far more capable than copper, something that could grind through one of the hardest common stones at rates that would wear copper tools to nothing in minutes. But if the precision of the pyramid's construction suggested advanced technology, what about the structure itself? What was all that precision for? Dunn spent years investigating this question. He examined the internal chambers. He studied the passages. He looked at every feature of the Great Pyramid through the eyes of an engineer asking what function each element might serve. And he arrived at a conclusion that seemed absurd at first, but became increasingly compelling the more he examined the evidence. The Great Pyramid was not a tomb. It was a machine. Specifically, it was a device for converting the Earth's vibrational energy into usable power. The theory, published in 1998 in his book The Giza Power Plant, proposes that the pyramid functioned as a coupled oscillator. The structure's mass and geometry were tuned to resonate with natural seismic frequencies, amplifying the constant vibrations that flow through the Earth's crust. The internal chambers processed this energy through chemical and acoustic means, ultimately producing coherent microwave radiation that could be broadcast for use elsewhere. Each element of the pyramid, in Dunn's analysis, serves a specific function in this process. The Grand Gallery, with its corbelled walls and precisely slotted side ramps, acted as an acoustic resonator, amplifying sound waves of specific frequencies. The King's Chamber, built entirely of granite, served as a resonant cavity, whose dimensions correspond to wavelengths that could excite the hydrogen atoms supposedly filling the space. The so-called air shafts, which do not reach the exterior in their original configuration, were not for ventilation but for channeling chemicals that produced hydrogen through reaction. The theory is elaborate and requires specialized knowledge to fully evaluate. Mainstream Egyptology has dismissed it as fantasy, another attempt by outsiders to steal Egypt's heritage by denying that Egyptians could build impressive monuments without alien or lost civilization assistance. Critics note that no ancient texts describe the pyramid as a power plant, that no infrastructure for distributing the supposed energy has been found, that the whole idea rests on speculation rather than evidence. But then came Biondi's satellite scans. The structures detected beneath the pyramids fit Dunn's theory in ways that he could not have anticipated when he wrote his book. 8 spiral shafts descending from the base of Khafra's pyramid, helical coils wrapped around central columns, enormous cubic chambers at the bottom where these shafts converge. Helical geometry is fundamental to energy systems. Coils generate magnetic fields. Spirals concentrate rotational forces. The helix appears throughout technology wherever energy must be stored, transmitted, or transformed. Tesla coils, transformers, inductors, springs, even DNA, the molecule that stores biological information and powers cellular processes, all employ helical geometry. If the pyramids were machines, the underground structures make functional sense. The visible monuments would be the above-ground portion of the system, tuned resonators sitting atop a much larger apparatus. The helical shafts would be components of that apparatus, serving functions related to energy concentration or transmission. The cubic chambers would be processing centers, places where whatever energy the system manipulated was collected or converted. Biondi himself has speculated about function. These structures might be related to information, he suggested. Information and energy. The spirals may relate to energy transfer given their precise geometry. This language echoes Dunn's theory without directly endorsing it. Information and energy are deeply connected in modern physics. Information requires energy to process and transmit. Energy systems encode information in their states and flows. a structure designed for energy manipulation would necessarily be a structure with implications for information as well. Water plays a role in both Dunn's theory and Biondi's speculation. Dunn proposed that water was part of the pyramid's chemical processing, combining with other substances in the Queen's chamber to produce hydrogen. Biondi has noted that water appears to be central to the underground structures. Water is the principal actor that is related to all these structures, he said. Water is the important stuff of life. In terms of number of molecules that compose our body, we are 99% water. The Nile once ran closer to the pyramids than it does today. The plateau sits above aquifers that have supplied groundwater for millennia. The Osiris shaft beneath the Sphinx's causeway is flooded at its lowest level. Water and the pyramid complex are intimately connected, though the exact nature of that connection remains unclear. If the pyramids were power plants, as Dunn proposes, they would represent technology far beyond what we attribute to any ancient civilization. They would imply scientific understanding that we did not achieve until the 19th century at earliest. They would suggest that human capability in the remote past exceeded human capability in recorded history, a deeply uncomfortable implication for our narrative of progress. But the alternative, that the most precisely built structures in the ancient world were merely elaborate tombs, requires us to believe that impossible precision was achieved for no functional purpose. It requires us to explain why builders who could level 13 acres to within a fraction of an inch would do so merely to house a sarcophagus. It requires dismissing the engineering perspective entirely in favour of assumptions about pharaonic vanity. The underground structures complicate this picture further. Whether they are power plant components or not, they are not tombs. They are not burial chambers in any recognisable sense. 8 spiral shafts descending a kilometre do not correspond to any mortuary practice known from ancient Egypt or anywhere else. The massive cubic chambers at the bottom are not sized for human remains. Whatever these structures are, they were built for a purpose that conventional Egyptology cannot explain. Dunn met with Biondi and the other researchers involved in the Khafra project. He was impressed by their rigour and their findings. He recognised in their data patterns that aligned with his own decades of investigation. The pyramid power plant, which had seemed like isolated speculation when he proposed it, now appeared to have physical correlates extending far deeper than the visible monuments. If approved exploration proceeds in 2026, we may begin to get answers about what these structures actually are. Physical access would allow direct measurement, sampling, analysis. The speculation that currently fills the void of knowledge would give way to data. The machine hypothesis would either find support or face refutation in the details of what the shafts and chambers actually contain. Until then, we are left with geometry. Spiral shafts suggest something. Helical coils suggest something. Cubic chambers of enormous size suggest something. The precision of the visible monument suggests something. The network connecting multiple sites across the landscape suggests something. What that something is remains the central mystery. Was it energy generation as Dunn proposes? Was it information storage as Biondi has speculated? Was it something else entirely, a function so alien to our categories that we lack words to describe it? The machine hypothesis may not be correct in its details, but it represents a serious attempt to answer a question that conventional archaeology has never adequately addressed. Why would anyone build structures of such precision, such scale, such complexity, if they were not meant to do something? Tombs do not require engineering tolerances measured in fractions of degrees. Tombs do not require helical shafts descending kilometres into the earth. Tombs do not require cubic chambers larger than aircraft hangars buried beneath the desert. Whatever the pyramids are, they are not merely tombs, and whatever lies beneath them, it was not built to house the dead. It was built to function, to operate, to do something that required geometry precise enough to detect with satellites, and scale sufficient to encompass multiple sites across the Egyptian landscape. The machine, if machine it is, has been silent for millennia. But its components remain, waiting beneath the sand for someone to understand what they were designed to do. The descent begins. We stand at the threshold of something unprecedented. For the first time in modern history, credible evidence suggests that enormous engineered structures exist beneath the most famous monuments on Earth. Structures that no human has entered in recorded memory. Structures that may reshape everything we think we know about our past. The evidence has been gathered. 4 satellite systems, validated methodology, consistent geometric signatures, a network connecting the pyramids, the Sphinx, and the sites 30 miles distant. 8 spiral shafts descending more than a kilometre. Cubic chambers the size of aircraft hangars. All of it invisible to the eye. All of it detected by instruments that see what flesh cannot perceive. Filippo Biondi and his colleagues have submitted a formal proposal to Egyptian authorities. If approved, physical exploration could begin in 2026. Teams would descend into the debris-filled shafts near the Sphinx, clearing centuries of accumulated rubble, opening pathways that may not have been travelled since before recorded history began. The descent, if it happens, will be the most significant archaeological undertaking of our time. It will answer questions that have persisted for millennia. Are the structures real? What do they contain? Who built them? When? Why? The speculation that has filled countless books and websites and late-night conversations will give way to knowledge. The mysteries will become history. But the descent has already begun in another sense. We are descending now through layers of assumption that once seemed solid, through certainties that are dissolving under the weight of new evidence. The Giza we thought we knew, the Giza of pharaonic tombs and ancient but comprehensible engineering, is giving way to something stranger, something deeper, something that challenges our most basic narratives about human capability and human history. The plasma bubble adds another layer to the mystery. In 2024, Chinese radar systems detected enormous equatorial plasma bubbles forming in the ionosphere directly above the Giza Plateau. These bubbles, regions of depleted charged particles in the upper atmosphere, disrupted satellite communications and GPS signals across the region. They were observed simultaneously over Giza and over the remote Midway Islands in the Pacific, suggesting some kind of planetary scale connection. Plasma bubbles are natural phenomena caused by interactions between solar radiation and Earth's magnetic field. They occur regularly in equatorial regions. There is nothing inherently mysterious about their detection over Egypt. And yet, the timing and location are curious. Ancient traditions associate the pyramids with cosmic energies, with connections between earth and sky, with forces that modern science dismissed as superstition until technology began detecting unexpected phenomena in exactly the places the tradition specified. The plasma bubble over Giza may be coincidence, or it may be evidence that something about that location affects the electromagnetic environment in ways we have not yet understood. If the underground structures served some energy-related function, as Christopher Dunn and others have proposed, they might interact with the ionosphere in ways that produce measurable effects. A system designed to couple with Earth's natural vibrations might also couple with Earth's natural electromagnetic field. The precision geometry detected by satellites might have correlates in the atmospheric anomalies detected by radar. This remains speculation. We do not know that the underground structures function at all, let alone that they influence ionospheric conditions. But the accumulation of anomalies, the structures, the mythology, the engineering precision, the atmospheric phenomena, begins to suggest that Giza is not a passive archaeological site, but an active location where forces we have only begun to measure continue to operate. Humanity feels ready, Jesse Michaels observed at the conclusion of his interview with Biondi. These kinds of discoveries are speeding up. There is truth in this observation. The pace of anomalous discoveries has accelerated dramatically in recent years. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a massive temple complex dating to 11,000 years ago, was unknown before 1994. The Bosnian pyramids, controversial but increasingly documented, have been investigated only since 2005. The Gunung Padang site in Indonesia, potentially the oldest pyramid structure on Earth, has been seriously studied only in the last decade. Each discovery pushes the timeline of sophisticated human construction further back. Each forces revision of assumptions about what ancient peoples could achieve. Each suggests that the standard narrative of civilization emerging in Mesopotamia around 5,000 years ago may be not wrong exactly, but incomplete. Dramatically, fundamentally incomplete. The structures beneath Giza fit this pattern. If they exist as the satellite data suggests, they represent capability that our current models cannot accommodate. They imply knowledge that we have no record of anyone possessing. They suggest that the visible monuments, impressive as they are mere indicators of something far more extensive and far more sophisticated. The truth is, we will know the truth only if we go inside, Biondi said. We have to go inside. This is the scientific attitude at its finest, not dogmatic assertion, not defensive dismissal, simply the acknowledgement that evidence gathered from a distance, however compelling, cannot substitute for direct observation. The satellites have told us something important exists, but to know what that something is, we must descend, we must enter, we must see with our own eyes and touch with our own hands. The proposal sits with Egyptian authorities. Their decision will determine whether humanity takes this next step in 2026, or whether the mystery persists for another generation. The same establishment that has dismissed the findings may now choose whether to investigate them. The gatekeepers who declared the data impossible may now open or close the gate to physical exploration. Whatever they decide, the data will not disappear. The satellite images have been shared. The methodology has been published. The findings have entered public discourse through podcasts and websites and social media channels that no authority can fully control. Even if official exploration is denied, unofficial attention will persist. The questions will not go away simply because answers are forbidden, and perhaps that persistence is itself significant. Perhaps the structures beneath Giza have remained hidden for so long precisely because humanity was not ready to discover them. Perhaps the technology that reveals them, the methodology that detects them, could only emerge when we had developed sufficiently to handle what they represent. Perhaps the gatekeepers who obstruct investigation are themselves part of a process, a delay that serves purposes we cannot perceive. This ventures into territory that science cannot map. The idea that discoveries happen when humanity is ready smacks of teleology, of purpose in history, of meaning beyond mechanism. Rational analysis cannot support such ideas. They belong to the realm of myth and religion and speculation, and yet we have seen how myth and speculation have aligned with physical evidence at Giza. The halls of Amenti described in ancient texts match the structures detected by satellites. The Hall of Records predicted by Edgar Cayce sits where the scans show underground chambers. The power plant hypothesized by Christopher Dunn finds correlates in the helical geometry of the deep shafts. Perhaps meaning and mechanism are not as separate as rational analysis assumes. Perhaps the ancestors who built these structures understood something about the relationship between consciousness and cosmos that we have lost. Perhaps the myths that preserved memory of their work encode truths that our categories do not recognize. Or perhaps not. Perhaps all of this is coincidence and misinterpretation, and the human tendency to find patterns where none exist. Perhaps the satellite data will eventually be explained as artifact, and the underground structures will prove to be natural features mistaken for engineering. Perhaps the heretics will be proven wrong, and the gatekeepers will be vindicated. The only way to know is to descend, to go inside, to replace speculation with observation and interpretation with data. The shaft entrances wait beneath the Giza sand, filled with debris that has accumulated over ages beyond counting. The Sphinx gazes eastward as it has always gazed, guarding whatever it was stationed to guard. The pyramids rise against the sky, capstones to depths we are only beginning to perceive. And beneath all of them, in darkness that has not known light since before our civilizations began, the truth waits. It has waited for millennia. It has waited through the rise and fall of empires. It has waited through ages of forgetting and ages of speculation. It has waited through every archaeological expedition that scratched at surfaces without understanding what lay below. Perhaps now, finally, it will not have to wait much longer. The descent begins. Whether physical exploration is approved in 2026 or delayed for another decade, the descent has begun. We are falling through assumptions. We're dropping through certainties. We are plunging toward a past that is stranger than we imagined, and a present that must accommodate revelations we did not expect. Whatever lies at the bottom of those spiral shafts, whatever fills those enormous chambers, whatever secrets the halls of Amenti have preserved through all the long millennia of darkness, we are approaching it now. The instruments have shown us the door. The choice of whether to walk through it remains. Thank you for joining me on this journey into one of the greatest mysteries humanity has ever faced. The evidence is real. The questions are profound. The answers may reshape everything we think we know about who we are and where we came from. If this exploration has sparked your curiosity, if you want to follow developments as they unfold, please subscribe and enable notifications. Leave a comment sharing what question this topic raises for you. Share this with others who might appreciate a calm, science-driven approach to extraordinary claims. The information presented here represents the best current understanding of a rapidly evolving situation. Science proceeds by investigation, by testing, by revision in light of new evidence. What we know today may be refined or revised tomorrow. That is not weakness. That is the strength of honest inquiry. Sleep well tonight, knowing that beneath the sands of a distant desert, structures that have waited in silence for ages beyond memory may soon give up their secrets. Dream of spiral shafts descending into darkness. Dream of chambers vast and silent and old. Dream of the moment when light finally enters those spaces and we discover what our ancestors built there, so long ago that even the pyramids are merely the roof of their creation. The descent begins, the truth awaits, and humanity perhaps is finally ready to receive it. Good night.